Hey everyone, welcome back. It's been a long time since I've posted a video, but I'm going to continue my Rubinstein series. So today we're looking at a very famous game, one of the most famous games that was ever played by Rubinstein, and actually probably the most famous, or one of the most famous chess games out there. If you've seen this game, probably know how it goes. If you haven't, then you're really in for a treat. This was played between Rotlewi and Rubinstein in Lodz 1907. Um, so let's just jump straight into it. So Rotlewi opened with d4, Black replied with d5, knight f3, e6, e3, and we go into a very normal position. It kind of resembles a Tarrasch, probably is a Tarrasch. And here White took on c5, and Black recaptures here, and White proceeded to play a3. The point of a3 is just to play b4 and kick this bishop. So Black played a6. Now, sometimes the bishop might come back to a7. Sometimes Black might play b5 given the chance. It prevents knight b5 stuff. And eventually, White might try to break the structure apart by playing like b4, b5. It goes on. So b4 was played, and now bishop d6. Note how Black did not play bishop a7, because if you look at this position, White has a pretty rock solid foundation with his pawns on the king side, so the bishop on a7 wouldn't really be doing too much. Um, so bishop d6, and now bishop b2. Black castled, and queen d2 is played. Now I give this a dubious little symbol here because it is not a good move. First of all, this queen doesn't want to be here. Now, what White really wanted to do was play like bishop d3, which is normal development. But the problem here is that Black can just reply with taking on c4, and this already costs White another tempo. And then after this, maybe b5, and this costs White another tempo. So that is why I think White decided not to go into this yet and just delay developing his bishop. He was probably really hoping that Black would take this, and this would actually solve all of White's problems, because now this bishop develops in one turn. So going back, Queen e7, this is a good move. Two things. This queen might eventually support an e5 push. It also prepares rook d8. Um, no, White really doesn't want to play something like c5, because yes, it looks like you're just kicking the bishop, but now e5 looks a lot stronger, and rook d8 is coming, and you never know. With the queen across the king, maybe Black will have ideas to rip open the center. So playing like this for White is really ill-advisable. Like bishop d3, for example, rook d8, and suddenly it looks really uncomfortable. Like if White just castles here, e5 comes, and Black has an amazing center. These bishops are going to stare down the board. Just a very uncomfortable position. There's already a threat of forking the pieces. Like if bishop e2, you can just continue with bishop g4. Black has like a very harmonious setup and should have a good game. So that was not played. Instead, bishop d3. And now Black just took on c4, which is logical because this bishop came out, and then played b5 again just to kick the bishop one more time. Bishop d3, and now rook d8. Black has very solid, very sound development. Rubinstein does not mess around. He just plays very solid, very principled moves. There's nothing wrong with how Black is playing here. White, on the other hand, basically wasted a move with queen d2. Like, the queen should probably belong on c2 instead. So White would really like to castle here. But there's a little trick here. It's bishop h2. This is a really good move because after knight takes knight e5, and suddenly there's a threat here, and Black just regains the material. It's really hard for White to hold on to this. So instead, queen e2 was played. We go back here, queen e2, to avoid this trick. That way, if this ever happens, there's no pin. So bishop e7, Black just develops his last piece. The rooks are connected. Everything looks good for Black. White decides to castle now. And now a good move by Black, knight e5. Now, it looks like you're just exchanging pieces here, but actually it gets rid of this defender. Now, White really doesn't have an alternative to this move. Like, he can't just let this knight get taken. If he goes back, then this just gets lost, and your queen drops. So, White is basically forced to take here, and we could see how these bishops look really, really nice. They look across the king's side, and you would probably think to yourself, well, okay, what is black really threatening here? Well, if let's say white plays some move to maybe stop this bishop from coming into the game. I don't know, let's pick a move like e4, for example. Black just develops, and his rooks are very nicely placed, and this e-pawn is weak. And white really doesn't want to play a move like f3 because then this diagonal is very weak. So already white is in a lot of trouble here because he just simply cannot play normal moves and stop the activity of this bishop and this bishop, like the dark squared one and the light squared one. Um, so white is just struggling here. He also can't really exchange pieces. He can't play knight e4 because after takes, you just lose material. Drawing arrows all over the board, but you get the point. So basically, white is kind of struggling here. So white decided to play f4 here to try and close this diagonal. This is not a good move. He should have played the very quiet, like, rook d1. Now, what if you just play h3? This looks fine, right? There's no bishop h2 threats anymore, and it looks like you're stopping knight g4. But actually, black has a really good move, and that's queen d6. You're threatening the bishop, and if let's say something like rook fd1, then queen c6 is really strong, because suddenly you're attacking the knight, but you're also threatening mate. So it's really not simple for white to just, get a grip on how his pieces are placed. If we go back here, if something else was played instead of h3, let's say f3, this is also really bad because now queen c7 comes again, attacking the knight and also attacking the h2 pawn, and there's no defense, so white just loses. And I think that's why f4 was played here, but again, I'm going to go back here. So rook d1 should have been played, and this is not an obvious move. I mean, it looks obvious, but to just sit here and basically ignore these bishops and ignore black's setup here is pretty scary. Like queen c7 comes, and you're probably wondering, well, okay, how are you stopping, taking on c3 and taking on h2? Well, you have to see that after rook c1, after this, you know, the black queen has to move because the knight's about to come to e4 or hit b5. Bishop takes h7, and this deflects the queen from the protection of h2. And after king takes, this is an equal position. But this is hard to see. This is not something obvious. And not only that, I still think black is still better because this bishop is very nice, and this bishop, it looks good, it will look good, but it isn't really doing anything at the moment. And black's queen can instantly pop out to one of these squares. The knight might reroute either here or here, and black has a very good position. But seeing this is very hard. So going back over here, instead of rook d1, he played f4. But this is just not a good move because you're weakening this e3 square, but you're also weakening this diagonal. And in a way, you are weakening this square as well. So white will not be able to defend the g4 square with like a f3 move if he ever needed to. He'd have to rely on h3, which only creates more weaknesses around these squares. So bishop c7, this is very logical. Black just retreats the bishop to a good square. He doesn't put it on b8 because maybe the rook wants to come to c8. And now e4, and white is like desperately trying to get some sort of center going here. But it's really not working. So these pawns, although they look really like imposing and actually pretty aggressively placed, they don't really have that much support. Like to support the f pawn, white would have to play g3, but this isn't going to end well because he's weakening this diagonal. And this e4 pawn, although like in combination these pawns look scary, they aren't actually doing anything. White cannot really play f5 because he'll start opening up these bishops, and you could imagine there might be some sacrifices, like maybe black would just take the bishop on d3, bring the other rook in, and suddenly like black's initiative is extremely powerful. Um, so it's a struggle. So rook c8 was played. Black just develops his final piece. I mean, look at these pieces. They're beautifully placed. I mean, if you look at white's rooks in comparison, they're passive, and this bishop is doing nothing. It's staring at the knight. This bishop is also doing nothing. It's just really hard for white to find any sort of coordination here. They look good, like white's pieces look fine. They aren't like in trouble or anything, but they're poorly placed. They're not doing anything. They don't have like roles in the position. So e5 was played, and I gave this a not exclamation mark, double question mark. This is a really bad blunder because first of all, you're opening the line of the bishop. Second of all, black is just going to enter on b6 and attack the king this way. At least when the pawn was on e3, bishop b6 is not as powerful because this diagonal is still closed. But since white committed to pushing these pawns this far, this only exposes the white king. So okay, he pushes the knight. And I don't think black wants to play knight d5 because this makes no sense. White would just exchange, and actually this relieves a lot of pressure from white's position because once you get rid of some pieces, this position becomes easier to play. Actually, this bishop looks like it's doing something now. And maybe white might have ideas of f5, and he can naturally bring the rook to e1. So we're not doing that. So bishop b6 first, and now knight g4. And this is an excellent move. If the queen takes, then just rook takes bishop. I'll just show that real quick. So if queen takes g4, rook takes d3, and this looks horrible. I mean, it looks okay. Like from white's point of view, it might be like, okay, we just exchanged pieces. But actually, this rook is extremely powerful, and there's a very simple threat to take on c3. Now, if the knight were to move, let's say, to e2, just rook c2, and you can see how these rooks are entering the position, and suddenly this knight cannot move because of rook takes g2. These bishops are absolute beasts. There's nothing that like white can do here to save himself. So the bishop is hit, let's say. So bishop c1, and now h5. This is a brilliant move. Basically, if this is taken, then black just crashes in and just kills white on the spot. Queen b7 comes, this queen switches over, and you can see with combination with these rooks, white's king is not going to survive here for long. Let's just go to the end to mate. Like rook f3, for example, you just take, bishop f2, take, and you can keep on capturing things, and once the queen enters, this is just mate. There's nothing, the king is just hunted down. This is just an example. White can play differently, but it all leads to the same thing. Okay, so going back here, instead of queen takes g4, bishop e4 was played. Now, white would be very happy if black did this, because suddenly there's no pressure on the light squares anymore, and this king is not on a dark square, and this knight is hanging. So actually, this is probably okay. But no, we're not doing that. Rubinstein played queen h4. There is another move here, which is knight h2. It's kind of insane. You can't really take this because of queen h4 mate, but it doesn't really take away from the game. Queen h4 is still very strong, threatening mate. And here white played g3. Now, what would happen if white played h3? Looks sensible, right? But this loses on the spot. Rook takes c3. This is a brilliant move. This did not happen, but just goes to show how strong black's position is. And if, let's say, well, first of all, let's go over the little things here. So, for example, if queen g4, then black just kills white with this move. And if this, you can just take. And the problem here is that if this is taken, then this is taken. And it's simply a disaster. Like, king h2 runs into rook d2, and these bishops in combination with this rook on the second rank will just win the game. It's actually mate, but you can just take the material if you wanted to, and black is just winning here. So okay, queen takes g4 does not work. What about just bishop takes c3? Well, now you can take this, and the point here is that after queen takes, queen g3 is a winning move, because you cannot actually take this knight because of queen h4 mate. This bishop is covering the key g1 square. It's actually insane. There's no way to stop this. There's no way to stop this mate on h2 or this mate on h4. White can resign here. So that's the point. That's why h3 was not played. So g3 instead. Now I want to give this position to you. If you haven't seen this game before, pause the video and just think about what you would do here. Okay, so the move here is rook takes c3. Just giving the queen. It's absolutely incredible. This move is incredible. Um, Now, white doesn't really have that many choices. The best way to survive would just be to take on b7. But actually here, black just wins with rook g3. This is still pinned. Let's say rook f3, rook takes, bishop takes, knight f2, and the king is just hunted. And you can take and rook d2, and suddenly, the king is just, once again, just getting cut to shreds because there's no way to avoid this attack. Like, okay, king f1, rook f2 just wins the queen. There's nothing to do here for white. So going back here, after rook c3, what happens if pawn takes queen? Now, if you haven't seen it this far, I want to give you another chance to really think about what you would do here. You can pause the video. Okay, so the move is rook d2. Black is just throwing everything at white. There's like no good response to this either. First of all, the queen cannot move. Like queen e1, you just get mated. These bishops are too strong, and it's just too much. So you have to do something here. So you have to take this rook, and the game finished like this: bishop e4, queen g2, and now the final nail in the coffin: rook h3. This is a ridiculous move. You can't take the rook, obviously. You take the bishop, it's the same story. You get mated. So an absolutely beautiful game. Let's just go back. It's honestly, I think it was that Aronian Anand game that was played a while ago where he had like a similar attack. I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, this game is absolutely gorgeous. So just to review it, basically, white messed up because he played queen d2 instead of playing something normal like queen c2. And black just took control here very easily. And I think it was white's fear that black has like the strong activity going on the king side that made him play very weak moves like f4. I'll take off the paint. But yeah, and then, the structure here is not going to last long, and this move e5 just allowed black to do whatever he wanted because all these lines have opened up, and white was wiped off the board. But this is actually called Rubinstein's Immortal game. I think everyone should know this game as much as they know Paul Morphy's opera game, because it is like an attacking masterpiece. To find moves like going over here, to find moves like rook c3, and realizing that you can give up your queen and completely crush white is actually insane. But yeah, so I'm going to leave you guys off at this position right here. These two rooks just hanging. And yeah, thank you for watching the video. I will hopefully be posting soon. I kind of started a full-time job, and life has been hectic. So yeah, thank you so much. Have a great week, day, month. All right, bye.